My cheeks are red. Yeah, and we're live. All right. Episode 3, Bourbon Boardroom. Although we kind of did a random one on Saturday with our friends from BS and Bourbon. But Danny, it looks like I haven't seen you in all of 15 minutes.
Yeah, right.
Good to talk to you again. I've been with Danny all day today on the bottling line. We were getting some stuff done today, and
got a lot of stuff done today. We were really cranking.
That we were cranking very much, and I believe we should be on Facebook, Danny, and we should be on YouTube, which is great. So we'll get some folks, maybe we'll get some folks commenting. But tonight we're excited. You know, we haven't done one of these episodes in a while. We were one of the things I was excited to have on the show was Sean Josephs from Pinhook Bourbon. Just an awesome company, making great bourbon whiskeys, and awesome guy. Really great founder, entrepreneur. And, one of the things I just thought was an interesting topic, Sean and I, we connect a lot. We talk a lot. And I thought, it's something interesting that maybe a lot of folks don't, behind the scenes don't realize is that although we're, in the same space and operating in the same arena, it's good to have peers and colleagues to bounce some ideas off and really kind of share some kind of best practices or just tips of the trade, especially Sean. He's been going at this for a while. He's built a great business, obviously. And Danny, I'm excited to get him on, man, and kind of boardroom number 3, man.
Is it?
Yeah, it's our 3rd episode. Although there's no rhyme or reason when we do these, we just kind of throw them on the schedule, and whenever they happen, they happen. But that's the beauty of it, and that's what we love about it. So without further ado, he's in a special spot here. You got the man, the myth, the legend in the house, man. We're coming in from the van in Sonoma.
Yeah. And Sean, I don't know the backstory with the van and everything, but I've been following you. I see you're traveling.
Yes. So, let's just set the record straight. I may not be the best guest you guys have, but no one else will do this from a van.
Dude, bullshit, right? Man.
Although, actually, the way things are going, maybe I might have a lot of competition. I think the van competition is fierce, as we've learned being out on the road. It's actually not easy to find camping spots because this has become such a popular. I think that I think it was already happening and then COVID accelerated it. But if there's a thing that would make you say you know what, forget about it. Let's pack the whole family in a van and just travel the country.
Yeah. Well, I think it's awesome. Think about
COVID.
Danny and I are dialing in from Jersey. You're in Sonoma.
Which I
kind of got us beat.
I love New Jersey. I caddied at the Monterey Golf Club for a couple of years in college. So I had a lot of affinity for New Jersey. Although I haven't seen anything quite like Sonoma in New Jersey.
No, we're getting there. We're building it. We're building that feature up. But so how's the trip been? Everything's been good. And tell me about this road trip. So now, how is it working? Work-life balance? You run a company. How are you, man? And you got the kids, the wife, everything kind of. How's it all kind of working out for you?
Yeah, so it's been awesome. I guess first and foremost, right? So we're like you guys, entrepreneurs. To me, the whole idea of being an entrepreneur is trying to be creative, right? So, and you guys both have kids, right? So Think early COVID, right? And I think your kids are younger, but I've got a 7-year-old boy, a 10-year-old boy, and a 12-year-old girl, right?
Yeah.
COVID hits, school is canceled, or school becomes remote, and you're stuck in your house. And at least the way we were looking at it, you're I think, and obviously this all started in March of last year, and you're thinking, well, next school year, the school year of 2021, no way that happens in person. And like many entrepreneurs, I was dead wrong about that. But nevertheless, you try to see, the future. You adjust, but you try to see the future. So in that moment, though, when we're like, okay, here we are, we're stuck at home. This sucks.
Mm-hmm.
It's not fun for the kids. It's not fun for us. From a brand building perspective, we're used to, as you guys are used to doing all the time, you're used to being out in the mix, out in the world, engaging with people. And so we're like, how can we do that? How can we take advantage of a really unconventional and difficult situation and try to not take advantage of it, but like do something creative and interesting that would actually be positive. And so, as you know, like most things, when you have an idea as an entrepreneur, everything takes time, right? So it took a while for us to like piece it all together, but the end result was that we sold our house. You know, the buyer of our house bought a lot of our furniture. We moved everything else into storage. We bought a van, but then we had to get the van built out, so that took time. And so then we ended up like actually living in 5 different rentals after we sold our house in November until the van was going to be ready. And then, of course, school all ended up happening in person, right? So then all of a sudden we were like, oh, well, the thing that we were trying to do maybe makes a little less sense. But, you know, rule number 1, I think, again, if you're an entrepreneur, right, is you're committed. We already sold the house. We already sold the house. That already happened. We did all the stuff. So what are we going to do? We're going to like see it through. And so the other interesting part that I think you guys would appreciate is like, we went to the schools, and obviously our goal was like, how do we make sure that they advance to the next grade? And then we were also just very clear, like we're not looking to become homeschooling teachers. Like basically I mean this in the best way possible. What's the least amount that kids can do that would make you comfortable that they advance to the next grade?
I can just see Sean in the back of the van. He's like, all right, guys, we're come on in. It's 10 a.m. We got blending 101. Starting at that, it's late. Blending 101 at 10 o'clock.
120 barrel samples minus 80 samples equals what?
You can do that, algebra. It's like, okay, we're going to work off truth gallons.
You know what's funny? Have you guys heard of a brandy producer called Osacalis out of Santa Cruz?
No.
Super teeny production. It is so good. If you tasted it, your minds would be blown. Anyway, someone introduced me to the guy who's the distiller and does all the stuff. And we took the kids there. My son and the guy, Dan, spent 3 hours with us explaining. He has 2 types of stills. He has a cognac still and an Armagnac still. And then we were in the coolest little barrel aging thing you've ever seen. Teeny. He's 90-gallon French oak, different trunk, all different types of oak. The kids were all smelling all the different spirits. My son is actually writing a report for his school about how brandy is made. Brandy is
actually pretty cool.
Wine, distilled wine, and he's aging it in wood. And my son loves science, so he really absorbed. This is the cognac still is not a continuous still. You basically have to like load it, come out the other end, get the distillate, load it back, and you have to manually cycle it. And then he has a cognac still, which is continuous. And this guy Dan was a planetary physicist, a professor of planetary physics for 25 years. So to say that he would be over all of our heads is an understatement, right? I was like, and I don't know, but do you guys, I'm saying this totally transparently and not to put you on the spot. Do you really know anything about distillation? Because I know nothing, and I'm frankly not very interested.
No, I kind of just sometimes turn to Danny and I go, dude, you got it. Because he's an engineer. He's kind of like thinks like that. But
I know the basic process, but there's so many little tricks of the trade, and there's a lot of science that goes behind it. I mean, I know you can distill something easily, and you could distill something right.
Yeah.
That's all I know.
What about this? I do know
Yeah,
this. I know there's good batches and bad batches.
Well, I know that.
I think we all know about good and bad batches.
You know what's fascinating? You know what was fascinating that you guys appreciate if you want to talk about business? This guy is a cognac and Armagnac fanatic, right? And he goes, I want you to, so we're tasting, right? Tasting all this amazing stuff. Hey, I want you to taste this 40-year-old distillate.
Huh.
It won't be ready for another 20 years.
What the hell?
Shit. So
That's how long they age that stuff. You know what he said that was fascinating, though, and I'd never thought about it? He goes, bourbon aging is about bourbon is all built for speed. Everything about it.
with the
And it's
American
all about
White Oak.
American and charred and everything, right? Everything is accelerate.
It's like, how do we do it quicker?
It's all speed, faster, faster, faster. It's just like, how do I get this done as quickly as possible?
Classic American spirit.
Classic American spirit. You know what's funny too? I'll get back to the other point, but I said to him, well, nobody really knows where the new charred oak thing comes from, because that was always, it's the Elijah Craig. And he totally called bullshit on me. He goes, actually, that's not true at all. Do you know where it comes from? And I was like, well, apparently I don't. He said, and I won't tell the story properly, but that essentially they are, after Prohibition, it was like a union negotiation to keep the cooperages busy, to keep people working. That's where the new charred oak came from. Because if you think about it, that allows you to just constantly have to produce because the barrels are constantly being disposed of.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's another great American story.
Huh. Wait,
Armagnac? But what he said, though, that was interesting. Well, he's making California brandy, I guess, to be clear, right? You can only make Armagnac and Cognac in those regions in France, but like he is he was the first person to assemble like Armagnac and Cognac stills that were built in France, in California, own vineyards, make his own wine, distill the wine, and then age it for long, long, long periods of time, right? And
I know nothing about Armagnac.
Like the XO, like the 40, 60, and the thing about cognac that's interesting, and cognac and Armagnac, is that the way he described it, bourbon is all about the aging because of the interaction with the wood, whereas cognac and Armagnac are all just about oxidation.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Because it's aging so slowly over such a long period of time that it's not about the expansion and the contraction and the expansion and the contraction. It's just about this slowly. Because have you guys ever tasted any like serious old bourbon, like something that was bottled in the 1920s or whatever?
No, I was down in Bardstown, and this guy at one of the places was like, "Hey, I got this 26-year-old barrel in the back. You want to taste it?" I was like, "Yeah, sure."
Yeah.
I mean, it was like sawdust. I mean, it was just
totally. But
it literally.
Is that a good tasting note or a bad tasting note?
It was just overdone.
But what's interesting, what's interesting though is what I'm talking about is an 8-year-old bourbon that was bottled in 1934.
Oh,
wow!
Because
that's still going to get oxidized. That's still going to oxidize in the bottle, though, right?
Yes. So we all talk about, like, in the industry, typically because bourbon gets consumed so quickly, everyone's always just saying like, no, not like once you put it in the bottle, it's freezing in time, right?
No.
And it is oxidizing. But honestly, to the average consumer's palate, it's not oxidizing at the rate of wine. Right, it's not having that level of change over the course of a year or 2 years or 3 years. It's oxidizing in a way that would be unnoticeable. But eventually, if you were to take a bottle of Penelope bourbon that you bottled in 2021 and you left it alone and you checked in on it 20 years later, you would see degradation of color. Like the color would darken, and you would see a massive shift in flavor. You'd see a change in alcohol, like the proof would drop, like all that type of stuff, right?
Well,
So
Sean, if you ever saw our first bottling, our caps were so goddamn tight we couldn't get them out of the bottle. So those are probably good for 200 years, Mike.
And we love our cap guy.
Those are good.
We love our cap guy. We love him to death. But when he says that, oh, it's like putting on the caps are kind of like when you put jeans on after the dryer or after you wash them. They're a little snug. I don't like wearing jeans after you wash them. You know, so that's interesting though. I love cognac. We were.
Did you guys?
Mike, you just gave me Armagnac samples.
I did. I gave you 17-year Armagnac.
Cool.
I think I have it right here. I'm gonna try it. I've never tasted Armagnac before.
So yeah, 17-year-old Armagnac is like 3-month-old bourbon.
Well, what was the guy from Pinhook that he started I think Armagnac Bacta maybe by Raj from I saw there's some new Bacta was kind of
from Whistlepick
and Armagnac.
Whistlepick.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think you know, I wouldn't automatically say, oh, if you like bourbon, you'd like Armagnac, but if you like brown spirits, you should definitely give it a go, right? I mean, it's incredibly complex, and you get a lot of the florality that you would expect out of a wine-based distillate, which is really cool. But do you guys? I mean, I was actually fascinated. I forget where I saw it, which maybe you guys came across this. They were talking about the neck pour, which has become this common thing. And the interesting thing was the article was actually debunking it. But the funny thing was, I went to this guy's Armagnac, you know, saw this guy Dan, and I was like, oh shit, like I don't have a bottle. Like this guy spent 3 hours with us, and he's like climbing up and tasting barrels, like we're having the most amazing experience. I don't have a bottle of Pinhook for him, and so I hop into the van, and I'm like, I have a bottle that's open. And there wasn't that much out of it. It was like just below the shoulder, like an inch below the shoulder.
Yeah.
And he immediately goes, oh, that's awesome. Because frankly, like it needs to open up. Like bourbon is tight. You guys know this. I think it's weird. The article was trying to say that the neck pour is fake, but
saw that. It's on
guys know
pair.
this because but I think you guys know this because you blend. I'll blend from samples, then I'll taste off the tank, but then I'll taste it when it's bottled, and it tightens up. Like something about all the process of like the dumping and the filtering and the agitation and the bottling and the packing, it definitely tightens
big time
the product. So when I get that first bottle, you know, whatever the most recent thing I blended is, and it's finally like done and ready and bottled, and they send me the sample bottle, I'm always unhappy with, you know, the first couple pours, and it just needs time until it tastes like what I feel like I blended when you get some air in the bottle.
We always see that. I mean, you and I mean, I remember even talking to, we've talked to like John Edwards about this, the Dad's Drinking Bourbon guys many times. And, you know, for us, it's, you know, the same thing with a lot of us that are blending. I mean, we're blending 3 different mash bills. Like you said, they're dumping the barrels, you're putting them into totes, capping the totes, and then pulling sample. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of commotion. It definitely tightens up. But what's interesting about these bottles is that almost every single pour is constantly evolving, and it's just there's an interesting dynamic that you'll see through the entire course of the bottle. I fundamentally believe in neck pour in terms of what's coming out. Maybe it's the shape of the bottles. We've got, you know, the kind of wine bottle-esque shape, but I do believe that it needs time to oxidize.
But I think to your point, the neck pour is an unfortunate oversimplification. It's not it's not about the pour in the neck and what's in that pour. If you popped a hole in the bottom of the bottle before it had been opened, and that would be, I guess, the ass pour. The ass pour would also taste shitty.
Yeah, I think so.
You know, because there's no oxygen in the bottle. So, you know, once you pour it out, it's not up the neck. Once you pour it out and you get more oxygen in the bottle, and to your point, Mike, yeah, I think the bottle gets half full. Somebody, I think it was the guy there, it's like, he was saying, sorry, this is Dan from the Cognac Distillery again. he was saying, and I shouldn't misquote him because he had a specific time range, and he was basically like, you should drink the first half of a bottle of bourbon, because he loves bourbon too, very slowly, and you should drink the second half of the bottle very quickly.
This guy sounds like a legend. Dan, this guy's a legend already.
Dan Farber, he is a legend. But he's right? Because the first half, it would constantly be getting more oxygen, opening up. I don't know if you guys have had a bottle, not just a Penelope, but anything you have lying around. It can get pretty messed up. Once you leave, like, it'll get too oxidized. The proof starts to drop.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
You don't want to leave that much or even that much in a bottle of bourbon for like 4 years. You know, if you spend the first 6 months drinking the first half of the bottle, or even a year drinking the first half, you should spend the next 4 weeks just finishing the thing off.
Yep, exactly. Now, I mean, I think part of it too is just the blending. I mean, I think this is a great question for you. I mean, just because we're always, now that we have this facility, we are doing just a ton of different blends and R&D and stuff. And we are kind of like, especially how samples operate. They go into 200 mLs. They're oxidizing. They're getting, moved around, and things are happening. We create that blend almost as if it's like what it's supposed to taste like when it's at like below the shoulder. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just thinking about it from a bottle perspective, and it'll get there on the neck pour. You just have to just let it oxidize, especially if it's a cask strength. So if it's barrel strength, you're going to get a lot of that ethanol up front.
I also think it's like,
have you guys?
I was gonna say, I also think it's like the first, if you have a fresh palate and then you hit that first taste off a bottle, and then you come back to it, it's like another, it's kind of the evolution of it, So I don't know. I agree. It's like it's a little bit of
most people. I mean, I also think, Dan did not say this, although I should give him credit for this too, because he's genius. But if you're about to dig in, if you're about to like taste the bourbon, you should probably take some of that bourbon, swish it around, and spit it in the sink. The first sip is always a hard one, right? Like, you kind of have to.
You gotta coat. You gotta coat. Yeah.
Proof. I mean, you gotta coat your palate. Like, it's, especially if you've eaten things earlier in the day, like, I think there's so many nuances. And I mean, have you guys seen, this is the other thing that fascinated me that I only discovered over time. When they pull samples from a barrel, they pull from the bottom, right? Like, that's where they drill the hole, right? Mm-hmm. The barrel is evaporating from the top, right? That's where you're losing your alcohol, from the top. Mm-hmm. So when you pull the samples from the bottom, they're way higher proof than the sample that you pulled is way higher proof than the barrel will be when you dump it.
That's interesting.
So let me give you an example. When we did our 5-year vertical rye, okay, I'm sitting there and we pre-blend, which I think is not typical, meaning I'm blending from samples. Most people are just, and probably you have more small guys that blend from samples. Big guys blend with barrels. Like, they just throw barrels in a tank. They're constantly analyzing distillate and making sure that everything is maturing. They're tasting it at like 20% alcohol, right?
Yep.
Just to look for flaws. But when it comes time when they hit go time, and they're doing 1,000 barrel dump, and they say pull 100 barrels from there, and just different floors, different ages of different rick houses, because they know that those 1,000 barrels, when you throw them in a tank, are going to taste like Maker's Mark or Old Forester or whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. But they're not building the blend in front of them, right?
Yep.
What we're doing, and maybe you guys are doing this too. I don't think I've ever talked to you guys about this, but we're pulling samples. If I do a 100 barrel blend, I pull 130 single barrel samples. And then I'm blending different combinations of 100 barrels from the 130 to find the best combination. So that by the time I get to my, like, this is the blend that I want, Then I'm telling the distillery, dump these 100 barrels. I already know what they taste like blended together, right? So when I did that for the 5-year rye, it was like a 43 barrel blend, and I had like 60 samples.
Mm-hmm.
When I finished the blend, we took the proof of the blend, which is based on the single barrel samples, right? The proof was 120. Then I'm proofing it to pick what I think is the perfect proof for the
Was this
blend.
Castle distillate or is this MGP?
No, this is MGP. This is
okay.
MGP.
Okay.
So then I had proofed it at 103 because I thought it was the best expression for the 5-year-old rye blend, right?
Yeah.
So our samples are 120, but we proof it to 103, and we tell the distillery, we want you to dump these barrels, dump them, and then proof it to 103. Guess what the proof was when they dumped the actual barrels into the tank?
And 110?
I'll just say it's lower. It's lower.
115.
Yeah, it was 111. 111 proof.
I won. Danny, gold sticker.
That was a great guess. So
that's wild.
You're 9 proof points lower because the samples that you pulled are from the bottom. And so we had actually learned this early on with Pinhook, where we'd made a mistake where, actually, I don't know if we made the mistake or the distillery made this mistake. It doesn't matter. But the bottom line was they said the proof of the single barrel that you're dumping is this, right? And then at the time, we did it where we were printing the proof on the label of the single barrel. Oh. Then they dumped the barrel, and the proof was 8 points lower.
You can't scratch that one out.
When you pull the sample, it's
how the hell?
It's just giving you a strata. It's giving you a layer. You're pulling the sample from a layer of a barrel, and the proofs are varying. So it's not until you dump the entirety of the barrel, and obviously then all the juice mixes up together, that you know the actual proof of the barrel when everything is. You're not blending a single barrel, but until all the juice in that single barrel is like mixed together. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You're not going to know. Yeah. I mean, that's the beauty. And that's, you got to see, Danny, we're just started the batch 7. You see he's got all the barrel samples behind him. Process.
The other thing that I noticed is also like when they drill the samples, if you get a place that they hold the bottle under the drill as they're drilling, you get a bunch of wood in there. That I've noticed that that affects the taste of the sample too. And it's like,
which makes perfect sense. And you're right.
It's basically a wasted sample.
Yeah.
What
That's
do I?
Funny.
Well,
you know what? I've seen, now that I think about it, I know the samples you're talking about, and I realized that I had never thought about that it was just coming because they're like drilling and they pull, and then it's just little
you're getting ready.
Wood drop.
Yeah. Do you do you move? Well, if you don't move the barrels, because I was going to say you could have them pull the samples right when they get off the truck. That way, the barrels are nice and shaken up.
Isaac. So your rye was this bourbon of the year, Sean. Your rye whiskey of the year. That was Isaac's. That's good. And he likes the 5-year better.
Thank you, Isaac. Sorry, it'll be fun to see. I mean, I think. No, but Danny's right. I don't think it's logistically possible, but that would be the best time to pull a sample from any barrel. It's off the truck. But these barrels have all the barrels we have from MGP, we moved Castle P when they were 14 months old. Mm-hmm. So they've all been sitting for a long time. I'm really happy with that rye, and I'm very curious. I mean, I'm sure you guys have heard the same, but the typical argument with rye is that it hits in wine. They would always call it a dumb phase, like a phase where you buy a case of wine, and you buy the 2012 whatever, and you've got it in your cellar, and there's a period of time of aging where it's nothing's happening and the wine kind of goes to sleep. You know, and I think that's kind of the argument with rye is kind of like, I don't know, does anything happen between 6 and 10 years old?
Kind of hits that plateau a little bit, like it starts to plateau out in terms of extraction.
Well, or just it's like, well, that ultimately, though, weirdly, at the older ages, it starts to show really cool stuff again. But it goes through an in-between middle age where it's not that it's not that it's not good. It's just that it's not showing much evolution. And that's actually kind of the point of our whole vertical series is like, well, I guess we'll find out, right? People can say that about rye, but no one's ever done this with rye before. So we've released the 4-year, we've released the 5-year, and we've got 7 more years to go. So we'll see, we'll see what happens.
I commend you for being patient. It's not easy. You see these extra barrels, you got POs to fill, and you're like,
Mike.
Let's just skip next year's vertical series. I got
that would be my. I'm always like trying to keep barrels in our warehouse.
That's funny.
Mike gets to them and then they're gone.
That's funny.
Yeah, it's good to have a yin and a yang. I'm like,
it's.
Can you imagine that, Sean? You imagine you like had a couple POs and you scrap next year's vertical series.
It's patience though. Patience is actually like, if you think about the vertical series, at least we get to bottle something every year. I mean, think about, granted, Heaven Hill's got their 1 million barrels lying down or whatever they have, but like, they're like, how much Elijah Craig 18 do we need in 2044? Like that's real patience, right? Really laying it down for the long haul. So at least we get to like touch a chunk of it every year.
Well, it's funny though. I think you brought up a good point about a lot of it too with the vertical series is like experimentation. Like we know what we're finding out what we don't know, right? I think that's maybe from your lens or from the brand lens, and we're working on that too with kind of like our toasted series where we don't really know what char level or toast level will necessarily work the best. We assume the quality of the product is good, but we don't know what that perfect balance is or what that sweet spot is. And I think what's interesting about the whiskey world today is that folks are willing to go on that journey, meaning they want to see those different vintages. They want to kind of experience those kind of new those. They could be subtle nuances on the flavor profile, but I think that's kind of the state that we're in, and I think that's kind of one of the most interesting things. Like, I think the vertical series is one of the coolest. Product lineups out. I mean, it's just awesome. That's my opinion.
Yeah. Are all the
thank you. I think
I was gonna say, are all the barrels stored near each other?
They're all so as you can imagine, we didn't get to be on the fourth and a half floor. I don't think there's not a 5th floor at Castle and Key. So we're on the 2nd and 3rd floors. So those are our 2 floors. And honestly, I mean, it's interesting. I remember when I opened my bourbon bar in 2008.
Dude, Maysville, right?
Char number 4 I opened first,
Oh.
which was in Brooklyn. Maysville I opened in 2012. But like,
I love Maysville.
Thank you. But I remember like this was a very different time where there was very little education, even from the distilleries. So when the distilleries would come in, they would just say, bourbon gains proof in the barrel. Scotch loses proof in the barrel. And that's because bourbon is aged in Kentucky, and Kentucky has this climate, blah, 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 and it's much cooler in Scotland, and you're by the water, blah, 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 right? That's the narrative. Well, here we are now. All we have, both with our MGP and our Castle and Key distillate, our barrels, 100% of them are losing proof. 100%. And that's brick and concrete warehouses, right, which are naturally cooler. We're not on the 1st floor, but we're not on the 5th floor either. And it's kind of amazing. I mean, if you look at even our 3-year-old Castle and Key bourbon, it's dropped 5 points from 120. It's at 115 already. In 3 years, it's at 115. At
Castle, did you do a 120 barrel entry? Was the barrel
We
entry?
did. Yeah, and that's it. What's that?
Well, no, I was. It was. Did it go in in the barrel at 120 from a barrel entry proof?
At 120 there too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's something else that would be fun to play around with. I just think there's so many variables between the barrel entry proof and obviously the mash bills and the time and wood and where it's aged, and I think it's kind of like an endless realm for exploration. But I'm curious how low they will drop, like, because I don't know anything about it. Like, is it like the trajectory of the dropping proof is the same year over year, or does it level out? I have no idea, because I'm like, I don't know, is the 12-year vertical rye going to be a 97 proof cask strength whiskey? I have no idea. The other thing I don't know is that good or bad? Is gaining proof good, or are these more oxidative and less, like, I think a lot of people who love bourbon feel like 5 to 8 years is actually the sweet spot.
Mhm.
So if you're going to have a 12-year-old bourbon, maybe you want a 12-year-old bourbon that's losing proof, because it means that it hasn't been like having these intense interactions with the wood.
Well, that's
Tell them the story
myth.
about the 99 corn barrels we had. The two that sitting right next to each other, and one of them was 94 proof at cask strength, and it was 3 years old.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's the lowest proof barrel that I've ever.
It was
seen.
delicious. 99 corn, delicious.
Yeah, but the problem was when we went back to it, it was empty.
Yeah, it's probably a leak in it. That's but that was a delicious barrel. A lot of oxygen. I mean, it was just probably just. I mean, that thing had. We got it. I mean, it was probably a quarter filled, and it was delicious. Nothing like I've ever tasted before. But 94 proof at cask strength. And I told Danny it was at Castle and Key. I said, just make sure that doesn't go into the blend. Let's bring it back. We'll just do something with it just for us. And we got it back, and it was completely empty, bone dry.
It was probably like under a broken roof.
Hey, Danny, though, leaks aside. Yeah. But leaks aside, if our barrels are losing rather than gaining proof, then we should actually be maintaining higher yield.
You would think.
Right.
Like, overall, you could say it's a good thing. It's not going to get as woody. You're not going to lose as much liquid because you're keeping more water, I suppose, right? Which would be more of the volume and losing more alcohol.
Yeah.
But I'm fascinated because I don't, again, I had no experience with this. And now we're just watching these barrels go down, 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 down. And let's see where it goes, because, I don't think we have any options to move them. So at this point, they live where they live. So we'll just see.
Now, something that I think is interesting is, like when you're talking single barrels with consumers or customers, they're always like, "What's your lowest proof barrel?" That's the golden ticket, and like I don't think that's necessarily true. And I know it's not true, but it's definitely something that you see out there. People kind of hunting for that low proof barrel.
I mean, we just dumped one. A great example. We dumped a single barrel today that was 119, and it was delicious. One proof point, 5.5 years old. 119.
Interesting. So Danny, you're saying you think that there's, at least, I mean, we're talking about enthusiasts, obviously, but they've come to believe that barrels that are losing proof are superior.
I've heard that multiple times, and to the point where like I started looking at it a little more closely. Like as you're going through your barrels, you're like looking for the low ones, and I'm trying to like see if it's true. And I mean, it's definitely not true. I mean, there's some that are some that are good, and they're a lot lower proof. But no, I've seen that. I've seen single barrels come out of really anything across the gamut.
So interesting. And that's what I think everything we're talking about is just how much there is to learn. And I think the cool thing is, like, you have an engaged consumer who's excited to learn all the stuff, not just say, like, no offense to makers, they make a product, but like, the idea of like, I'm a maker's drinker. Like, that's what I drink, period. I mean, I think that's frankly what the industry was built on, was the idea that you pick your brand. And those people, they're like, hi, I'll have a Dewar's on the rocks. And they're like, I'm sorry, sir, we don't carry Dewar's. And they're like, okay, I'll have a Budweiser. Like, they're not interested in drinking whiskey. They're interested in drinking Dewar's.
Yeah. I'm just laughing too. We used to have a buddy in high school.
That's what I'm thinking of. Our friend Nick.
We had a buddy in high school. He was probably 21 years old, and I lived with them in Los Angeles. Nick, we called him the Rick. He would just walk into a bar. Doors, rocks. He's like 21 years old. I don't even think he liked it. He just liked the notion of drinking this stuff. Like when he was 21. Like, dude, just get it.
That's awesome. I'm a Dewar's guy. I'm a
Dewar's guy. That's funny.
Yeah, there's certain brands out there where it's like you're never going to convert them, or at least I don't think you can ever.
Yeah, there's always going to be loyalty. I mean, that's brand building.
But that's a different generation. I think that's what's interesting. That's what we're talking about. We have a generation of people who, grew up with, or at least, once they hit drinking age, of the idea that like, I'm going to hang out in this parking lot of a brewery because I want to taste this special beer that they're making that will never be available again. That's what I want. I don't want to drink one beer over and over and over again. I don't want to drink the same bourbon over and over again. I'm curious about the range of flavors and styles, and I want to dig in. Like, that's what makes it interesting. So that's why I think it's a good time to be doing this.
No, I mean, we talked about this a lot too. I mean, I think that's also one of the beauties of blending, right? I mean, I think blending, you could take 3 53-gallon barrels. They could be the same mashes, or they could be different mashes, whatever have you. And you could come up with so many different variations on what that final profile could look like across. Okay, does it have a nose? What's the aroma? What's the palate? What's the finish look like? I mean, just by tinkering a couple percentage points on, different variations. I think, to me, that's why blending is, I think anytime you get a single barrel, it's always amazing and it's special and it's unique in its own right. But I think blending is just a completely separate and different entity that I think people are really now gravitating towards. Obviously something you've been doing for a while, which is cool, which I think is great for folks such as us.
Yeah, I think it's making people understand. I mean, again, it's something that the industry as a whole was not marketing or advertising. I mean, I don't know how you guys grew up with bourbon, but if you paid any attention to it, it was really just based on this idea, this sort of beautiful, sort of the bucolic countryside of Kentucky, the rolling hills, the limestone filtered water, and the magic of these big warehouses. Mm-hmm. But no one was really talking about what it takes. And honestly, like, I don't know if you guys are, I have a wine background, but like, even if you think about non-vintage champagne, right? Just like, let's say, Veuve Clicquot Yellow Label. Mm-hmm. If you talk to the wineries about it, they will explain to you how challenging it is to constantly replicate the same tasting champagne from different wines, because they're working from all these different base wines in multiple vintages, right? So they're doing they're doing the wine version of what distilleries do. They have all of this wine, and it's from different years, and the different years have different characters. But their goal is to blend it together so that even though they're working with different ingredients, you can't tell the difference between one, they don't call them batches, but like one batch of Clicquot versus the next, right? And the interesting thing is, but they were always selling the idea, vintage champagne versus non-vintage champagne are two very different things, right? Yeah. The vintage champagne is obviously grapes grown in a particular year, and non-vintage is blending together grapes from many different years. But even when they were selling non-vintage, they were selling the art of the blend. Do you know how masterful the champagne blender has to be to work from 50 different base wines from multiple vintages and somehow be able to replicate the same flavor that you love in Veuve Clicquot?
It's
But
not
if you
easy.
think about, and I think this is where the bourbon industry, it's not easy, right? But the bourbon industry, I think, has always been one of the most terrible industries at marketing. Because if you think back to even 15 years ago, what I'm describing as non-vintage champagne is basically the only thing that happens in bourbon. That's the
Right.
entire bourbon industry. I'm taking these variable ingredients. And I'm blending them together. And it's the art of these blenders who can figure out how to take these constantly changing variables, water, because the weather's different every year, because one barrel is made from one tree and no two trees are the same, and it creates all this constant change. And they figure out a way to give you the taste that you love. The bourbon industry never marketed the art of blending, even blending to the idea of the same profile. And that's really just their fault and their mistake. And instead, I mean, think back to like when you guys grew up drinking bourbon. Like, did anyone try to explain to you how that it even is made in batches and that maker's mark? I mean, I did the math in my head. I think I could do like a 1,000 barrel batch of maker's mark every week, or maybe even more, to meet global demand.
At least.
And no one, at least, right? And no one ever talks about, like, as a distillery, they never talked about, like, they just keep talking about the rolling hills and the horses.
Which are nice. We love that. We love that.
And but they don't talk about what goes into doing that. Like, you're just supposed to think about the brand and the magic of Kentucky, but you're not supposed to think about the craftsmanship that goes into assembling blends. Whereas in wine and cognac, which is similar too, right? Because cognac is also about replicating a flavor profile from lots of different barrels of different ages.
Sherry too.
They talk way more about the blenders than sherry. You talk about the blenders, not the distillers. Now, all three of us sitting here are very biased, probably, to focus more on the blending than the distilling, which is fine. But there's a real story to be told about, like, the distiller creates good ingredients that then can be used in many different ways to blend. But in cognac, in champagne, they treat the blender as like the artisan. And they treat distillation as like the chemistry. And then they give credit to the farmer for growing the grapes. Like, it's like three different stages. Like, this person grows beautiful grapes. This person knows the chemistry to distill wine, into a spirit. And this person knows how to take all of these aging barrels and create the magic of cognac.
I don't hear the term like terroir used much in the whiskey industry or the bourbon industry. Mostly like Scotch, right?
Yeah, Scotch, I think, because, there's more of a climate thing. And I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting question too. I wonder if, the real question, I think even before the question is the term being used is it even viable? Meaning, could you put a Minnesota rye and a Finger Lakes rye in front of you and be like, well, obviously this is Minnesota rye, right? Because of this, and this, which I will say, as someone who spent a lot of time in the wine industry, you can tell the difference between California Pinot Noir and Oregon Pinot Noir, or Oregon Pinot Noir and Burgundy. And sometimes it can be confusing, to be fair, but there are noticeable markers that give the wine a sense of place. Can that exist in bourbon? I don't know
Danny,
the
isn't
answer to it. I'd
MGP?
say
Don't
it's
they get their rye from Northern
possible.
Europe? Don't they? I think MGP. They said they told me that their rye is maybe they. I thought it was Northern Europe. If I remember correctly.
I think it's just harder because there's a lot of stuff coming from different places.
Yeah, I think they're just sourcing what they can from their supply chains.
But to your point, Danny, if there's a terroir, you have enough grain to glass people out there that over time maybe someone will be able to say, this was made in Virginia from, like, they farmed it and they distilled it. This was made in New York. They farmed it and distilled it. This was made in South Carolina. And then, but it's only credible if you can
taste the difference. It's not a marketing.
The problem is, like,
you got to be able to taste the difference.
And then of course the problem, you'd have to taste the difference, and then of course the problem would be like, it was farmed there, but what's the next bill? And then it was farmed there, but what cooperage did they use? And it was farmed there, but what
you go down that rabbit hole?
And it was farmed there, but how old is it? It would be challenging, but it's certainly interesting to see what might come out of that for sure.
Well, no, it's funny you brought that up about the keeping the kid. Nobody realized that, and I'd be curious too with your flagship rye as well. But usually one of the hardest ones for us to blend is our 80 proof 4 grain, because we are going for consistency, and we are doing small. Obviously these are smaller batches, and it's just we're always going after flavor, not going for that batch. And we always talk to ourselves. We're like, as you grow and get bigger, eventually your supply chain is going to move to tankers. Right. I mean, that's just the bottom line. Maybe you do a barrel dump at MGP and you're blending it. But how do you meet that consistency, such as Makers or such as Woodford, where you can really do it at a scale where, you can be on 5 continents with it. I think that's just, I mean, we're not there, but it's something always interesting to think about, because that is the hardest product for us to blend.
Oh, man.
It's never going to be the same, but we know it.
Yeah.
Baby steps, Mike. Baby steps.
Yeah, baby steps. I'm dropping 5 continents on a Wednesday night, a Tuesday. So.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I wonder though. I mean, have you guys ever heard the term flavor drift?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, between barrels.
Well, no, more like between batches. It's like the idea that, like, yes, and I don't know why I always use Makers, because it could be anyone, but I'll keep using them. That they have their sensory team, right? But as you guys know, no batch can taste exactly like the other batch.
Never does, ever.
Right. And over time, the flavor might start to drift for any number of reasons. It's just like, it's not like, it's organic material, aging in organic material, and I'm sure they have their computer machines and they can do their little tests on the juice and try to figure out if, like, it hits certain markers.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's like humans are involved, and I don't know. I'd be so curious with, like, a Makers, like, is there another sample somewhere? Like the sample that's like, this is what Makers taste like, that all Makers is judged against. Like, how do they do that?
And think about palates. Palates are always evolving.
Blenders are changing.
It's humans.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And it's shifting. The flavor's drifting. So I don't know. It makes me wonder, like, how much it's like, I think the consistency needs to be focused on deliciousness.
That's it.
Because as long as it tastes really good, is that person really going to be like, I don't know. It tastes delicious, but it tastes a little different than last time. Do they care? Like, I don't know.
I think as if our batches grow, we have more options to choose from. You can kind of hunt out similar stuff, just seeing, kind of tasting through the same mash bills for the last 3 years. You start seeing consistencies between certain batches or certain distillations at certain times a year and that kind of thing.
I mean, I will say we're 100% transparent. So one thing I'm transparent about that I don't talk about very much, just because I think it would be confusing, is, like, if we have a new vintage of bourbon, we can't blend it all in one batch because we can't work at that scale. So we do multiple batches of it. Same with the rye, like our flagship product, orange wax bourbon, green wax rye.
Mm-hmm.
I can't blend it all at once. So now we've established the proof for the vintage, right? Because we can't change the proof because that would really get complicated. Because we each vintage, I pick the proof that's best for the first blend I do for the vintage, and after that, the proof is locked in. But I'll be totally honest with you and say, after that, I'm just looking for the subsequent batches. I know they all have to be 98 proof. So now I do a new batch. I know it has to be 98 proof. And I'm going to pick and I have multiple options that I blend to like, which one should I pick? I'm going to pick the one that tastes the most delicious at 98 proof, not the one that tastes the most like the prior batch.
Yep, that makes sense.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And granted, and you guys understand this because this is what you do for a living, but the barrels that I'm working with have a similar average age, right? Mm-hmm. And because of the way we're doing it, I don't see the value in saying, oh, our 2021 bourbon, flagship bourbon heist, there are actually 5 batches of it. Let me label each one batch 1, batch 2, batch 3. And one batch is 125 barrels, and one is 75 barrels, and one is 50 barrels, and one is 100 barrels, and another's 50 barrels. And to like get that granular about it, I don't think makes a lot of sense, at least the way we're approaching it. But by the same token, I now know that the proof is 98 proof for Bourbon Heist. And so now every time I do each batch, I'm just going to work towards the most delicious bourbon at 98 proof.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
No. Well, it's interesting because we're getting ready to do something kind of similar with our barrel strength. We've never done it like this before, where we would do batch 5, batch 6, and batch 7 is sitting behind Danny, and I think it's like 140 barrels, but we'll get it down to, you'll get it down to like 100 or something like that. And we're doing that the second week of June. However, we're not going to be able to do similar to exactly what you were saying. We can't do that full batch the way we want to do it from a blend perspective. So we're actually going to be running batch 8, and it's going to be different. And we've never done it like in that. We usually would just do it all as one, but to your point, we have to actually break it up into 2. Now I don't know, because it is barrel strength. We just let the proof be at from whatever it will be. So it's not necessarily a proof similarity, but I've never done it that way where it's like you're breaking that up. So I'm kind of interested to see how that all goes too.
I mean, all I can say is I've never had someone say, I bought a bottle of Bohemian bourbon and it tasted very different from the last bottle of Bohemian bourbon. Mm-hmm. Like something happened. Like I've never seen that happen. This is where I be honest too. And I don't mean this. This is not a knock on, let's say, the average consumer, but they would have to be so dialed in. I mean, as you guys know, like you taste your stuff all the time. I don't care if you have an awesome palate. You'd have to be super dialed in on one specific producer's product to say, I don't know, all I do is drink Pinhook orange wax bourbon. And I know that each vintage is different, but I've bought 5 bottles of the 2020 Bohemian orange wax bourbon, and I've seen some variability in the bottles.
Yeah,
you'd have to be so sharp palate wise, and I don't think, and not just have a sharp palate, but it would have to be so sharp on one. And you've got 75 other bottles on your bar, or 30 bottles, or 10 bottles.
Yeah, and you're constantly going in between all of them.
We get a decent amount of
criticism.
We get a decent amount of variation because of the 3 mash bill blend, which like I don't think we would have done if we ever just, if we were starting out knowing more when we started, we probably wouldn't be blending 3 different mash bills together. But because like we have to go through each mash bill and then kind of sift through those barrels, kind of profile them, and then pull them out, and then blend those together, and then do that for the other 2 mash bills at the same time, and then blend those 3. Maybe we're overcomplicating it.
I mean, how did you guys come up with that notion in the first place?
I mean, you knew we talked about this, Sean. I mean,
or is it accidental?
No, we were kind of like, it was that naiveness of just cold calling MGP, being like, hey, I want to like create a bourbon company, and it's called Penelope, and I heard you guys sell barrels. We go in there, and there was just this, maybe some folks. I mean, I don't know. We just went in there. We didn't know anything about the industry, literally nothing. And it made that we went in there and just Danny and I like the rise. Danny gravitated towards that wheat and corn sweetness. And, MGP didn't say anything that first meeting. It was probably 2 hours max. And they sat there and they go, well, what if you guys just blend them together? And I never forget this. I go, oh, that's like, you guys are cool with that? Like, we've never and we just did it.
What mash bills? What mash bills do you guys have?
It's the 99 corn. It's the kind of foundation. The 21 rye, and the 45 wheat, which is kind of a tricky one. That became very popular as of recently. The 45 wheat's always the most inconsistent from a batch perspective, only because they don't right at the time. I think they're running more batches of it now. They only run 2 batches of 45 wheat per year. So that one would have some variation, especially on the seasonal side. But the 99 corn and the 21 rye was usually pretty good. And then now we know, like, just knowing the team, I mean, you kind of pinpoint certain warehouses or certain batches or certain cooperages and things like that. But every one of our products has only used those 3 mash bills from the rosé, everything. We've only dabbled in that blend.
And you always, but the percentages of each mash bill vary.
Yeah. Always. Because I remember that first meeting, Danny, you remember this first time. I remember that I kept going, well, these don't taste the same. And there was like, and maybe they did say flavor drift in one of those first meetings and it flew over. I just wasn't paying attention. But from there on out, we've always known that they're going to just have it's going to be ebbs and flows of flavor. And so it's been interesting.
I think in the end, that's what's more exciting to people, though, is the variability. I think it's not that it's great that there are plenty of products out there. If everyone wants it to taste the same every time, they have that. There's plenty of that out there. But it's cool that there are a lot of people out there who are kind of like interested in the variability.
I mean, that's kind of what we have fun with. But I know we're coming up on an hour here, man, and I know you're getting close to probably dinner time for you, so I don't want to keep you too much longer. But anything like what are some of the things? What are you thinking about from a product perspective? Any sort of new, like what's I would love to get your take on cast finishes to just everything in general. Like, what are you thinking about from a next perspective in terms of product?
I mean, we have something. We did our artist series, which is a black label, which I kind of think of as experimental in nature. And then we're working on this other idea of a collaboration series. Thank you. Yeah. I was really, and I should mention too, because I hardly deserve all the credit, but one of my founding partners, Charles Woodward, does all of our packaging design. So that was, and I know you guys also, design in-house. So it's always very satisfying when everything that you do is like self-created. Like, we don't really outsource a lot of stuff.
Save some money too.
This series is basically like an endless opportunity. You save so much money. You know what it costs to go to like a real design agency and say, like, design me a logo or design me a package? Like, that's crazy expensive.
Like, let's focus group it. And you're like, it's a little expensive.
So the artist series, I mean, that's fun because I could just say, like, who knows? Like, we could literally do anything. Like, that's the experimental, and maybe that's where we play around with finishes and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of like endless to play around with. And I think right now it's something we've only sold through our text to buy channel called Breeze. But, as you guys know, you kind of see what people are into, right? You're like, I don't know, does anyone care about a rosé finished whiskey? And then people are like, this is badass. And then you're like, oh, maybe that becomes a permanent fixture. So ultimately, the art series is something that could become more broadly distributed, but for now, it's just like tiny little ways of playing around. And then in kind of late May, I collaborated with a friend of mine who's a winemaker. He worked at the French Laundry. He worked at Per Se. He has this great winery called Maison Noir Wines. And I just thought it would be fun to invite him to do a blend, because my whole thing is like, I never was in the spirits. I was a wine guy who got into bourbon and just felt confident enough in my palate that I could blend bourbon without ever spending a day at a distillery or understanding how they do sensory evaluation or any of that stuff. Just like, I'm taking it from the standpoint of like, I know what good wine tastes like. I know what good things taste like. I'm just going to make this taste good to my palate. And so I thought it would be fun to invite someone who's actually a winemaker, because I've never been a winemaker, and let them do a blend. Now, the fun part about this is, and this is the thing I want to really continue to focus on moving forward, is, the whole idea of a pinhook is you buy something and you sell something, right? That's what pinhooking is. And so I don't want to lose sight of our kind of origins and roots. And so I want to continue to hunt all over the country for cool barrels that are, do smaller releases that kind of showcase what these craft distillers are up to. And so the cool thing about this, our first collaboration, these are Wyoming whiskey barrels.
Oh, cool.
That I bought, or I should say Pinhook bought, because I don't have any money, in 2016. And we've been aging them at Castle and Key ever since. And they're a mix now of 10 and 11-year-old barrels.
That's actually really cool.
I pointed this out to, I was mentioning this whole thing to Blake, who I know you guys know very well and are friends with. And he said, which hadn't even occurred to me, he said, I think this will be the oldest craft bourbon release ever.
Probably.
Right?
Sounds like
meaning not a craft brand, but from a craft distillery. Because have you ever seen 10-year-old or 11-year-old, I don't know, High West, distilled at High West? Or think about the other guys, Balcones, or a Hudson Baby Bourbon, or even a Stranahan's, who's been around for a while.
Forever.
I've never seen anything like this. So these are 2 5-barrel blends that are a mix of 10 and 11-year-old Wyoming whiskey. And I got to tell you, that stuff, I'll be totally transparent about this. When I bought those barrels, I was like, I had tasted Wyoming early on and I was really unimpressed. I was like, they taste like, I know the founder, and when I had Maysville, he was like bringing me their 2-year-old stuff. And I was like,
like you were the buyer that was like, nah, get this, not way too young for
well, they weren't even selling it. He just gifted me a bottle, but I was like, oh, these guys are like, and I think Dave Pickerel was consulting, but I don't know, whatever was going on, it just was not great tasting distillate. Then I kept tasting it and it kept getting better. But even those barrels that I bought, which are wheated bourbon, which are like grain to glass, I wasn't like, oh, this is phenomenal. I was now like, oh, this tastes solid. Like, this is good bourbon. Why not? Let's buy some barrels and see what happens. It went through an evolution. When it was like 8 or 9 years old, it was kind of, I would say, very interesting, but not delicious. And then somewhere when it hit 10, 11 years, and I've heard this about wheated bourbon, actually, that wheated bourbon really needs a long time to come around.
Yeah, I could see that, yeah.
Those barrels, when they hit 10, 11, they started tasting like candied apricots and tobacco. And it's like, they're incredibly complex and delicious whiskey. And so then all of a sudden I was like, look at this. We've got, well, I don't know, as far as I know, we're going to release the oldest, not just the oldest Wyoming stuff that's ever been released, but like the oldest craft whiskey that's ever been released, right? And batch one is like 700 bottles. Like, it's stupid, but we did a white label for that. So it's like the inverse of black label. It's like white label, white wax, gold lettering. I love it. Andre has a great palate, so he did a great blend. But that was a really long answer to the question. But like, I want to keep. Oh, it's painful. But I want to keep digging around for like other, like, I don't know how much you guys taste what's out there in Minnesota or Wisconsin or here and here, but just to keep on top of, because I think the craft guys are getting better and better and better. I think it was certainly easy in the past to just be dismissive of craft whiskey and say like, yeah, it's chemistry, and a lot of these guys don't have the experience, and just because they're working small doesn't mean they're producing a clean product. Right. And now, I mean, I've tasted. Have you guys tasted like Driftless Glen or J. Henry?
Yes. Delicious. Yeah, we were going to buy barrels from, we actually got to get back. We probably will. We were going to buy barrels from Alan at Spirits of French Lick, because they had some really great profiles. I love them. We got the list. I mean, that was one that we haven't done it yet, but I mean, I don't even know if I'm supposed to say that on there, but yeah, no, like we've spoken to a lot of folks. I know like there's folks up in upstate New York, and no, it's actually a really, that's the idea.
So that's kind of, so if you think about the way the company Pinhook was founded, it was the idea that in thoroughbred horse racing, a pinhook is you buy a baby thoroughbred based on its lineage with the explicit intent of selling it when it's mature. And it was about being transparent that we buy and sell barrels. We're not a distillery. We don't want to be a distillery. We try to find the best promising bourbon that we can, and then we sell it. And so obviously Castle and Key, having a contract with them is like a variation on that, but of course it's not our distillery. So that's what the collaboration series, and I guess going back to your original question, is like, what do I want to work on? Yeah, I just want to keep like digging around and being excited by the things that people who actually know how to distill, which I have no idea how to do, are doing. And I think what's potentially cool is like you guys were a small brand, but maybe we're getting more name recognition than some of these other guys. And maybe we can bring their amazing distillate to a broader audience, because of our following, or just because of our sheer, like, how many states we're in. And so through that, maybe someone will taste something from, Wisconsin or Minnesota or wherever that they wouldn't have tasted because they live in California, and they're like, I don't even know they made whiskey in Minnesota, but I've heard of Pinhook, and Pinhook tells me that they're really happy with this whiskey, but being transparent about where it came from. So that's kind of like, that's something that I find really exciting, because as you guys know, because you've done the same, there's some people making some super delicious whiskey out there.
Good stuff out there, man. Like really good stuff. Yeah. And I'll be honest with you, it's hard. The 3-tier system is not easy to navigate. And that's the hard part. I mean, I think navigating that 3-tier system is tricky. It's just the sales and marketing side, especially the sales side from the 3-tier. It's very, very it's tough. I mean, it's just a different beast. And, especially with the online not being fully online, I think, with Sealbox and Curiata and some of these other platforms, Mash and Grape, they're helping that get out there a little bit more. But I mean, that's still still in the first inning, from an online perspective. But, I got to tell you my crazy idea from, because Sean, Danny, and I, we're all big idea people. We like big ideas. So like this whole rosé, we talked a lot about blending, right? And I don't know, maybe I just think this could be fun. And I think Compass Box does this quite well. But I go, wait a second. Yeah. Why is it that I get the whole cast finish thing? that's fine. Usually sometimes in a lot of these cast finishes, they come with a quart of sherry in the bottom of it anyway. And, I'm thinking, well, what the heck? Why can't I just go out and find a beautiful 100% Grenache rosé from France and blend? And again, it's not going to be a bourbon. And why can't I blend rosé wine with bourbon? Or Armagnac with bourbon, or single malt Scotch with Penelope? Why do I have to be constrained to rye whiskey or straight American whiskey? And so I told Danny, I said, I can recreate that rosé cast finish. I probably can make it better by actually blending, like we've been talking about for a lot of this show, with blending the rosé. And again, it's not like a flavor. It's not like I'm adding powder flavor. It's not like I'm not looking to make Fireball. I'm looking to really blend different spirits. Now, it would still be a DSS, which is fine. I mean, that's no big deal, but I think, Danny, I am so big on this idea. I think it's very cool.
He's big on it. This is like the fourth or fifth time he's brought it up. And when that happens, he's serious.
Look, you come to Jersey, we're going to be blending wine and bourbon together, by the way, in the facility.
Let's do it all. Yeah, the gloves are off. It's almost time to get back to doing everything in person. So, yeah, I love that idea. And I honestly, I think that, there's, even if you look at good cocktail bars, they love to do split base cocktails with two different spirits. If you look at New Orleans, it's a great example, right? A lot of the famous cocktails in New Orleans were originally made with cognac, and it was because of the Revolution, the war with the French, etc., that there was no longer cognac available. But there was an in-between period where someone would say, like, you actually make a classic Sazerac by blending equal parts cognac with rye whiskey. And in fact, that like the original mint julep was like a cognac base, or like a cognac and bourbon based. Like there was a period where both were around, and you only had so much. And so I think it makes perfect sense, right? And I think that the Japanese are more open to the idea of like, yeah, I'll throw a little cherry juice in there. It's not.
Just throw it.
It's not, but not in an artificial way. But just that, like, you're trying to build all these flavors, and so why does it have to just be like, yeah, maybe a little rosé, maybe a little small percentage of wine in there?
That's how we
that actually brings me.
That's how we test our cast finishes. You usually start with putting a couple percentage points of the rosé right into the bourbon. Just be like, are we even on close? Yeah, it's not that. It's in that profile. Okay, then let's keep digging. So,
yeah, I think it's. I always love talking to you guys because you're super creative and really you're serious about having a good business, but ultimately you just want to have fun and enjoy the experience of trying to do fun and different things in this really cool space, right? So I love all of it, and I can't wait to see your facility. I get back to New Orleans in like mid August, and then it'll be time to like get back out into the world, and certainly I'll be headed to your area. So I can't wait to meet you guys in person.
Nice, yeah.
It'd be awesome, man. And we'll do a blend. Maybe we'll do a charity barrel. We'll blend a couple of fun stuff together and grab some Pinhook bourbon and Penelope and blend something up and do something for charity or something like that. We'll figure something fun out.
I can't wait.
But look, man, this is it. The Bourbon Boardroom. I appreciate you coming on, and it's always good to talk to you. It looks like the trip's going well, and yeah, man, always a pleasure. Thank you.
It was so fun, guys. Danny, great to finally, meet you. And
yeah, absolutely. Same.
Look forward to seeing you guys soon.
Awesome, man. Take care.
All right. Cheers, y'all.
Bye.
Take care. All right, bye.